Tina told me that Rabbi Vogel is in England.
Oh, he was supposed to go last week.
Yeah, he's going. He's supposed to meet. He's supposed to meet with the Prime Minister.
All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to get to learn some Torah with you all while Rabbi Cameron and Rabbi Vogel are out of town. So you have me for this week and next week. So we're going to learn some Torah together. We will open up with our blessing for Torah study all together. Baruch atah Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'divrei Torah. All right, let me share my screen if I
Yeah. Even with the doctor said that you could go.
changed the way Zoom looks.
Comfortable with that?
I'll be comfortable. Oh, thank you, buddy.
Let's see how this. Oh, here we go. All right. Can we all see this?
Yeah.
Okay. So this week's Torah portion is Hukat. It is jam-packed with a lot of great moments, from the moment of the red heifer to the death of Miriam and the death of Aaron. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the death of Miriam, a little bit about the death of Aaron as well, and talking about mourning. So for those who are in the Talmud class, we spent months talking about mourning, and here we are once again talking about it. So we'll begin. This is Numbers chapter 20. These are the first 6 verses of the chapter. Does someone want to read for us? Rob?
The Israelites arrived in a body at the wilderness of Zin on the first new moon, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Miriam died there and was buried there. The community was without water, and they joined against Moses and Aaron. The people quarreled with Moses, saying, "If only we had perished when our brothers perished by God's will. Why have you brought God's congregation into this wilderness for us and our livestock to die there? Why did you make us leave Egypt to bring us to this wretched place, a place with no grain or figs or vines or pomegranates? There is not even water to drink." Moses and Aaron came away from the congregation to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. The presence of God appeared to them.
Okay. What is going on in these first few verses? Anything that we notice?
More Jewish fetching.
More Jewish fetching, yeah. So it happens almost constantly. The other week we had them complaining that there were no cucumbers to eat. They remember the good cucumbers in Egypt and all of this. And here we are, right? They arrive in the wilderness, first new moon, so Rosh Chodesh. And
I'm sorry, is this after the Ten Commandments or before?
yeah.
This is after.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And the first verse, right? The Israelites arrive, and then Miriam dies and is buried. And that's all we get with her death scene, if it were. And then immediately, the second verse, we learn that the community was without water, and they began to rise up against Moses and Aaron, and they start complaining. And then if we're familiar with what happens after verse 6, we know it doesn't end so well for Moses and Aaron. What happens right after this?
No, he strikes the water twice.
Yeah, exactly. So God tells Moses and Aaron, right, take up your staff and speak to the rock, and then the water will come out. And Moses doesn't do that, right? Moses tells the Israelites, listen up, you rebels. Shall we get water from this rock for you? And then he strikes the rock, twice. The water does come out, but in that moment, right, he loses faith in the community, he loses faith in God. But if we look at what happened just a few verses earlier, Moses and Aaron, their sister just died and is buried. They have no opportunity to mourn, to sit Shiva, to do anything. They immediately are faced with a crisis in the community and are unable to deal with the death of their sister. The sister that, if it wasn't for Miriam, Moses never would have even been born.
Well, would have survived.
Or survived, but there's the
survived,
midrash
Okay.
where Moses's father,
Oh, okay.
right, wanted to divorce his wife, and
Right.
Miriam says, you can't do that because then no child will be born, and the Pharaoh only said no sons can be born, so now you're not allowing any kid to be born. And then Moses is then born, and then she saves him. Stan?
First of all, who is Rabbi David Winship, and how is this related to whatever you're doing? It says Source Sheet by David Winship.
So this is just the source sheet that I found to teach. It was just created by him.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure who he is.
Okay,
though.
the other thing is that, of course, at this point, there's no mourning practices or anything like we have. There's no
Certainly, yeah.
indication that people mourn in any specific way.
Yeah.
But
Whoa,
certainly
whoa,
we
whoa.
know that.
Oh, yeah.
There is Joseph.
Is that
Yeah.
true?
Didn't they mourn for 30 days?
Well, we'll also see a little bit later in this Torah portion when Aaron dies,
Yeah.
they mourn for 30 days.
Don't they put on sackcloth and I mean there's
Like mourning
lots of
clothes,
mourning,
yeah.
or there appears to be mourning rituals well before this.
Yeah. And here there are no rituals, for at least for Miriam.
I mean, is that because she's a woman?
Don't know. We will look at an interesting piece in the Talmud a little bit later that talks about the way she died and the language that it uses. And it does discuss the fact that it uses different language because she's a woman compared to, George?
Yeah, they use the word without water, which sometimes refers to Torah.
Yeah.
Without what?
Without water. The second line.
Yeah. All right, let's move on this. I want us to look at this midrash, which I think is really pretty powerful. So this is 14th century midrash on these verses. Someone want to read for us? Steve? You're muted.
Sorry. The Israelites arrived in a body at the wilderness of Zin.
No, sorry, next
No,
one.
no.
Next
Oh.
one.
The Midrash Haggadah. Sorry.
Yeah.
And the nation fought with Moses. It is also said Moses and Aaron were sitting inside crying, and Israel was crying outside. And Moses was not aware of them for 6 hours. They entered and said to him, "How long will you cry?" He said to them, "Should I not cry over my sister who has died?" They said to him, "As you cry over one soul, cry for us, for we have no water to drink." Immediately he stood up, went out with them, saw that the well was dry and that they were fighting with him. He said to them, "Is it not as I said? I am alone and not able to carry you."
So here the Midrash says that Aaron and Moses were mourning. They were inside crying over their sister for 6 hours. Meanwhile, all of the Israelites were outside crying, not because Miriam died, but because they had no water to drink. And so they come in and they start yelling to Moses and Aaron, "How long are you going to cry? Get over it." And Moses, very reasonable, I think, "Should I not cry over my sister who has just died?" And they say to him, "You're crying over just one soul, but cry for us. We are hundreds of thousands of people and we have no water to drink and we might die."
So I'm curious, something George said that if in the Hebrew when Miriam died, it said she was without water, and then the very next story is about the community not having water.
Yeah.
And I wonder what the connection is there.
So we'll see. I think the next source talks about the connection.
Oh,
So I say
okay.
that, Miriam provided the well for the entire time when they were in the wilderness. And when she died, the well dried up.
But I thought it said that she died without water.
No, it says the community was without water, just as Miriam died there and was buried there.
Oh, I
Doesn't
thought
say-
that somebody said that the Hebrew Miriam died, it referred to being without water. Maybe I
Yeah,
mistaken.
well, okay, the community was without water, without Torah.
Oh, I see. Okay, I misunderstood. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
aren't we supposed to read the Torah 3 times a week? Because, you have to get water, to
Exactly, yeah.
all that
You
stuff.
can't go more than 3 days without Torah.
Yeah.
You can't go
Well,
more than a few
what
days.
is the significance of the water?
So we'll get into that in a little bit. But so the rabbis talk about the fact that we have in verse 1, Miriam died, and in the immediate verse after that, the community had no water. So the rabbis in the Talmud tell us that there was a connection, that the well was all because of the merit of Miriam. I don't want to spoil it because we'll get into kind of how they connect the dots. And it really takes us back to when she was there for Moses when he was in the water as a baby. And then because of her merit and her kindness, the Israelites had the water in the middle of the desert where there really is no water.
So the Israelites responding because there's no water is a very serious concept.
It is
I
very
mean,
serious.
it's not some fetching. It's significant. You're in the middle of the desert, and suddenly there's no water. It's realistic to expect people to be worried.
Yeah.
It's not just fetching that I don't have a good meal.
Yeah, well, they do fetch about not having a good meal as well.
Well, that they did, but about the water, that's significant.
Yeah, true. I mean, you can't survive without water, where you can go, days without having food and still survive. But in our midrash and in the Torah, the verses, were Moses and Aaron, should they have been permitted to mourn over their sister? Like,
Of
yes,
course.
they're the leaders of this entire nation, but they still just lost their sister. Are they not able to go through their emotions?
Well, according to the Israelites or the people that are there, that they should stop crying already. But they're entitled to mourn over their sister.
So there's a couple of questions. We'll look at question number 2. So what's the challenge for public figures, so Moses and Aaron as the leaders, in showing their emotions? And what is lost when they do not do so? So if you just look at the verses, Moses and Aaron they're not really showing their emotions until a little bit later when they get angry. But what happens when they're unable to show their emotions, when they're unable to grieve in that moment, and when they are told, get over it, you've been crying long enough, you need to get up and lead us. Yeah, Rob?
Well, the grief, it builds up within them and causes resentment and anger
Yeah.
toward the whole situation, toward God, toward the people, and it eventually becomes released in a negative way.
Yeah. And if you're unable to express your emotions when you are in that raw state, and then you have to kind of rush into action, it's going to come out in an explosive way, which is what happened with Moses. He was furious. And we keep reading, and later on, about 10 chapters from here, Moses gets angry again. in Deuteronomy, Moses gets angry. He keeps getting more and more angry as the rest of the Torah continues. Yeah, Rob?
Well, it leads to the question, we all understand this. Why doesn't God understand it? And why is God does God eventually punish Moses for realistic human emotion and the human reaction to this by not letting him go into the promised land?
Yeah. I think for Moses, he was held to a higher standard than the rest of the community. And God expected Moses to get on with the job and to lead this people. That was his mission. And Moses should have been able to control himself in that moment, and he was not able to.
I disagree with God.
Okay, yeah.
I agree with Rob. Rob.
Yeah. Yeah. And we see what happens. I talked about this in my Shabbat message, that what happens when we are unable to really express our emotions in that moment and we get angry and we're unable to just like walk away from a situation. We let the anger control us and we're not in our right headspace. And the piece in the Talmud, I don't think it's in this source sheet, but it tells us that when you're angry, all of your wisdom ceases to exist. And then for prophets, all of the prophecy goes away. So in this moment, Moses, who was a prophet and very wise, everything disappeared because he was so angry. That's all he could see was red in that moment. Because he was unable to, fully, I think, grieve for his sister. Which I think is then fixed when Aaron dies and everyone grieves, the entire community, for 30 days, which happens in the same Torah portion. Any other comments? Kathleen?
I think it goes back to the question of, is there a proper way to mourn? Because what we're seeing is Moses being separate from and distant from the people. He's always reinforced by God when he's with the people. And Miriam had been a leader in her own way. I mean, she'd been part of the musical tradition and been a source of the water for the people. And it surprised me in a way that he didn't enlist the people to mourn with him.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's what God was upset with it. It's as if his relationship with God has become such that he's becoming more and more distant from the people.
Yeah.
And as he becomes more distant from the people, he's not sharing with them in the same way. And I think if he had just said, let's mourn her together, she's been our source of water, she's been a source of musical leadership, whatever.
Yeah.
It would have been, I don't think it would have elicited the same response from God.
Yeah.
He isolated.
Yeah, exactly. Had Moses invited the community to come and mourn for the loss of a great leader, for all of these years. But instead, Moses is unable to deal with it. He's unable to be a perfect leader in that moment. But there are other leaders. I mean, we have earlier the idea of when there is an issue in the community, you would have, separate judges and small leaders of the group that they can go and complain to those people, the heads of the tribes. Right. So perhaps someone, the rabbis tell us, why couldn't Joshua have stepped forward in this moment? Joshua is going to be the next leader. Why couldn't he have at least gone and talked to the community and let them understand the situation and then go and speak to Moses and find a resolution?
Joshua may have been very young at that time.
No.
He wasn't that young.
Oh,
Well,
yeah,
let's say he's in his 20s and immature, whatever.
no.
You can't say, why didn't he go? Why didn't anybody else go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't put the blame all on him. That's not right.
No, I mean, but some of the rabbis are saying that, if he was told that he was going to be, the leader, he's Moses's kind of right-hand man next to Aaron, and he could have at least noticed that Moses is a little emotional in this moment And at
Well,
least,
maybe he did and they just left it out. This is
yeah,
all
but-
written by man to begin with.
well, yeah, true. All
Yeah.
right, let's take George.
Yeah, I think this took place with just 1 year to go.
Mhm,
So they were 39 years into the desert by now.
mhm. Yeah, and things aren't already, I mean, the whole book of Numbers, right? It's so far it's not looking so great. We had the spies,
Yeah.
right, the other week who came back and reported a very, negative outlook. We just had the, rebellion of Korach last week. And now our great leaders are passing away. And we're trying to feel like what is going to happen to this nation as they get inch closer and closer to the promised land. All right, I want to take a look at this quickly. This comes from the Talmud in Ta'anit. So this tells us about the well and Miriam. Someone want to read for us? Anybody? Stan?
The well was given to the Jewish people in the merit of Miriam. The pillar of cloud was in the merit of Aaron, and the manna in the merit of Moses. When Miriam died, the well disappeared, as it is stated, and Miriam died there. And it says thereafter in the next verse, and there was no water for the congregation. But the well returned in the merit of both Moses and Aaron.
So here we get the rabbis tell us that, and Miriam died there, and then immediately in the next verse, and there was no water for the congregation. And it says, so the well was given to the Israelites due to the merit of Miriam. When she died, the well disappeared or it dried up, and it only came back because of the merit of both Moses and Aaron. So then it continued to follow them afterwards. Yeah, Stan?
Well, it tells us, in a sense, though, that if we don't have these great leaders, God isn't going to give the necessary things at the necessary time.
Yeah.
It's not just because we're there. It's only if we have leaders that that produce that merit, and
Yeah, exactly.
that's worrisome.
You have to have leaders that can, provide for you and to help you on your journey. If someone can't lead, then you're not going to be able to survive. All right, let's move on. So this is an interesting piece. This is what I was mentioning earlier. This comes from Bava Batra. This I can read if you want. The sages taught there were 6 people over whom the angel of death had no sway in their demise, and they are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as it is written with regard to them respectively, with everything, from everything, everything. Since they were blessed with everything, they were certainly spared the anguish of the angel of death. Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, as it is written with regard to them, that they died by the mouth of the eternal. So this is for Aaron and Moses, and then which indicates that they died with a kiss and not at the hand of the angel of death. The Gemara asks, but with regard to Miriam, it is not written by the mouth of the eternal. Rabbi Elazar says Miriam also died with a kiss, as this is learned through a verbal analogy between the word there, sham, mentioned in regard to Miriam, and Miriam died there, Numbers 28, verse 1. And the word there mentioned in regard to Moses, and Moses died there, Deuteronomy 34, 5. And for what reason is by the mouth of the eternal not stated with regard to her? It is unseemly to mention death by a kiss with regard to a woman.
Is this Midrash?
This is Midrash, yeah.
Because it's really out there.
Yeah. So what the rabbis are doing here in the Talmud is they're making like a verbal analogy. They're saying we have the word sham in Hebrew there with this verse when Miriam dies, and it also has it when Moses dies, but it describes Moses' death as by the mouth of the eternal. So we can assume, using the word sham, that Miriam also died by the mouth of the eternal, but it didn't explicitly state that in the Torah because it didn't want to make it out that the mouth of God kissed Miriam, a woman.
Pretty pathetic.
Yeah, say more.
It's just so crazy.
Yeah. Anyone else? What do we make of this? No thoughts?
Well, I'm relating this to an article I read about in today's New York Times about the formation of the Women's Olympics last century in the 1920s, and how it was considered for women to participate in the Olympics unseemly. And this is I relate that that those what I view as really nonsense thoughts that male dominating thoughts that we no longer subscribe to, and this is the same.
Yeah. This a lot of this in this time period comes from the idea, shomer nagia, like you're not touching a man's not touching a woman until they're married. You're not even, no holding hands or anything. So we can't have God, who for the rabbis is male, kiss Miriam. Like, it wouldn't work. But in our, I think, modern understanding, I think at least for me, God is beyond gender.
Exactly.
All right, so now we're going to jump forward. This is same chapter, verse 29. And we're going to see the difference here. Just 28 verses later, after Miriam dies and the whole issue with Moses striking the rock, we have the whole community knew that Aaron had breathed his last. All the house of Israel bewailed Aaron 30 days. So now we have 28 verses later, right? Not that long. And everyone knew, the whole community knew that Aaron died, that he had breathed his last. Maybe they were surrounding him when he died. And then they all mourned for him for 30 days. They all, went through Shloshim together, right? And for those of you who were in the Talmud class, right, who is required, who's obligated to sit Shiva and Shloshim?
I think the sons.
Yeah, so the sons, if your spouse, your children, for your parents, or your siblings, right? But this is saying the entire house of Israel, so not just his relatives, his close relatives, but everybody sat Shiva, went through Shloshim for Aaron. Somehow Aaron gets a special treatment, and Miriam doesn't. The best Miriam gets is the people complain. But here, they actually pause. For 30 days, no one moves. They are all going through the grieving process. Perhaps because they learned what happens when you don't grieve. 28 verses later, or earlier, when Miriam died and there was no chance to grieve for Moses or Aaron or the entire community, it led to people complaining. It led to Moses and Aaron getting angry. It caused them their chance to go into the promised land. So perhaps God or the people or the authors of our text realized that there needs to be some sort of process that everyone goes through as a community. And who was Aaron, by the way? Not just Moses' brother, but Aaron was...
No,
priest.
yeah.
Well, he was also a public figure, though, and throughout
was-
the Torah, that he was always there, and Miriam was more in the background, except for the stories that they tell about her, at the sea and maybe other places, but not certainly as prevalent in the story and as prominent as Aaron.
Yeah. George?
Yeah, he was, besides the high priest, he was a peacemaker.
Yeah,
He'd go
exactly.
from tent to tent, and make peace.
Yeah.
So he was mixing more,
Yeah, he was in the community. He was the spiritual leader of the entire community. Moses wasn't necessarily the spiritual leader. Moses was their teacher. Moses taught them law. But Moses, we know, is not the best people person. Right? From the very beginning, Moses didn't want this job. Moses doesn't handle conflict well. But Aaron does. Aaron seeks out peace, and Aaron is the one that you go to when you are sick or when you need to offer a sacrifice. Aaron is the one you go to for guidance. He was the original, rabbi, essentially. So everyone had that connection with Aaron. Any other thoughts before we move on?
Or wouldn't that explain that they would mourn for the 30 days as opposed to just they didn't do it after Miriam and see what happened? I mean, it's to me, that's more of a logical reason than that, they knew what happened, and so now they are going to mourn for 30 days.
Yeah, I mean they know what happens when you don't mourn, and now they say we need to mourn for a leader in the community. And it even kind of becomes halacha regarding if for your rav, for your main teacher who taught you the most, halacha in your life, you can mourn for that teacher as well. So for Aaron was that spiritual leader for the entire community, and so all of Israel could have been obligated to sit Shiva and Shloshim. Okay, now we're going to jump into the end of the Torah. So Moses, the servant of God, died there in the land of Moab at the command of God. So Moses dies. Also, the people mourn for Moses for 30 days as well.
It doesn't say that.
It doesn't say that. It's a little bit later and after. It's not in this sheet. Okay. Someone want to read this a bit long? Anyone want to read the Toldot Yitzchak? This is 16th century.
I'll read it.
Okay. Thank you.
And Miriam died there and was buried there, and there was no water for the congregation. Our sages of blessed memory provided a rationale for the juxtaposition of the passage dealing with Miriam to that preceding it and following it. With regards to that preceding, if they said, why was the passage dealing with the death of Miriam juxtaposed to the passage of the red heifer? To tell you that just as offerings atone, so too the death of the righteous atones. With regards to that following it, and there was no water for the congregation, from here it can be derived that they had the well of water all 40 years in Miriam's merit.
And so here again, we have the same, it's quotes Ta'anit 9a, which we read earlier about the merit of Miriam's, why they had the well. But then it talks about why is this connected. The first chapter of this Torah portion is the red heifer, which is one of those laws that really doesn't seem to make any sense, and you're not supposed to try to make sense of it. Essentially, you'd have to have the ashes of the red heifer. So when you come into contact with a corpse, that is the only thing that can cleanse you in that moment, are the ashes of the red heifer. But the ashes also cause the one who prepared it to become impure as well. And then so it says, so it's juxtaposed to the passage of the red heifer that just as offerings atone, so too does the death of the righteous. It atones for sins in this moment. And Miriam was one of the righteous ones. All right, you want to keep reading the next paragraph?
We are able to provide another rationale for the juxtaposition to that which follows it. It would have been proper for for all the Israelites to have wept for her, being she was a prophetess and she was the sister of Aaron and Moses. All the more so, the women who followed her out with cymbals and in dance would have wept for her a lot, as we find in the case of Aaron, that all the house of Israel wept for him. And for Moses, all the Israelites wept, but they did not do so. And so, because the waters of their eyes were consumed, and they did not weep for her, therefore, the Holy Blessed One, tit for tat, made sure they would not have water to drink.
This is an interesting kind of midrash that he's bringing us. And it talks about, people should have mourned for Miriam. She was a prophetess. She's the sister of Aaron and Moses, right? And I think, Steve, you mentioned it, that all of the people who sang with her at the sea and danced with her, they should have mourned for her. No one did. But we learn all of the house of Israel wept for Aaron and for Moses as well. So here, Deuteronomy 34:8, so just 3 verses after Moses dies, we learn that everyone mourned, or they wept, they cried. But for Miriam, they didn't cry. They didn't shed a single tear. And if we connect this to, the midrash that we saw above, which came about a century or two earlier, it does say that the Israelites cried, but they weren't crying for Miriam, right? They wasted their tears on the fact that there was no water to drink, right? But here it tells us, though, because the waters of their eyes were consumed, they did not weep for her. They didn't cry for Miriam. So because that they couldn't physically release the water from their eyes, God removed the water from the well. It's almost as if God is saying, you should cry when you lose someone who means a lot to you. Someone who is a leader, someone who is a prophet, someone who has helped you on your journey, someone who you might consider to be family. And God is almost punishing them in this moment. God's saying, you didn't cry for Miriam, so you're not going to get any water. All of the water is going to be dried up. What do we make of this? Do we think this is fair?
Well, if the Israelites could make the connection, then it was fair. If they can't see the connection, maybe not.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, Rob?
Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see where there's a reference to the possibility that the Israelites did not mourn for Miriam. Is that only because we're assuming that because they were complaining about the water instead? This midrash really is kind of it's kind of makes a lot of assumptions that I don't get.
I think they're taking what happens in the actual text, and it goes straight from Miriam died there and was buried there to the community rises up against Moses and Aaron. There is no other verse where we talk about them weeping. But when it comes to Aaron and Moses, the Torah states that the entire house of Israel, the Israelites, mourned or cried for Aaron and Moses.
Got it. Oh, I see.
They just complain. They realize there's no water, but they don't make the connection that the water was only there because of Miriam. There's a great commentary that I'm going to use in my little drosh, that it was only in that moment when they noticed that the well had dried up when Miriam died. It was only in that moment the Israelites were appreciative of what they had when they no longer have it. And they realized was the reason we had this water. But it was only after the fact that they go through this whole scene and it's too late for Moses and Aaron, that the people realize that appreciate what prior to Miriam's death.
Got it. Very good. Thank you.
Any other thoughts? Yeah, Stan?
Well, as far as the events at the sea, and that was a generation ago, and presumably most of that generation died. And now we're talking about the next generation that are, quote, privileged to go into the land. So how privileged are they in that sense?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Well, I'm saying that we're saying that they didn't remember, that the people almost 40 years later didn't remember, or didn't, what Miriam did. They, of course, they've had the water all the time, but it's not said over and over again that that's why they've had the water. It's only now that they say this is why you have the water.
Yeah. But it's interesting. I mean, the if you look at just the Torah without the commentary, it doesn't explain that they had the water because of Miriam. Like that's a later rabbinic development.
Yeah.
But the rabbis tell us that the Israelites may have understood at a later time that it was because of Miriam, that they only when she's no longer there do they not have the water. But perhaps, yeah, they might not have known. I mean, 40 years later, they could have easily forgotten what had happened. I mean, it's a whole new generation, and we've lost a lot of people along the way. All right, I want us to keep going. There's going to be a few more commentaries. So this is Gersonides. This is 14th century. So he says, I think Miriam in her wisdom must have drawn people to serve the eternal. It is as if the Torah were telling us that as had Miriam not died, the people would have never quarreled with Moses. Moreover, Moses and Aaron would have consulted with her when God told them to speak to the rock, since she was a prophet and their elder. She would have kept them from doing anything stupid. I love this. Gersonides, he comes in, he's a philosopher, and he's saying that had Miriam not died in that moment, the people would have never complained to Moses and Aaron, Moses and Aaron would not have struck the rock. And if the people did complain a lot when Miriam was still alive. And he's kind of telling us that they would have gone over to their sister and asked her for some advice. And then she would be able to kind of calm them down and stop them from doing anything stupid. And here I love this. This kind of tells us that men are quite irrational, right? According to Gersonides, that when you want to go and you want to get the best advice possible and to find someone to kind of calm you down and to think logically, you go to a woman.
Okay.
Which is interesting because, if you think about society, in the past, and at least in our country, it's kind of the opposite, right?
Well, women are considered so emotional or whatever.
Exactly. So that's the what we have been taught in this society. But Gersonides, this is what, 700 years ago, and he is telling us the complete opposite, that it's men who are irrational and illogical, and that if you want to get the best advice and to learn to not do anything dumb in a moment, you go and you talk to the woman. Thoughts? Do we agree with that? Do we not agree with that? George?
Yeah, I'd like to see what it says in the original. I mean, maybe somebody is, trying to make a statement and, makes it this way.
True. Yeah. I'll take a look.
Because these rabbis didn't really talk that way, keep Moses from doing something stupid.
They do use the word stupid quite often in rabbinic literature.
Okay. But I would like to see it,
Yeah, and the person who had the source sheet, they didn't tell us where they got this. It's just a quote from him.
Yeah.
I'll look into it and see if I can find it from that verse and to see what language, what Hebrew he actually used. But either way, I do believe whether he says that she would have stopped them from doing anything stupid or not, there is the idea and the tradition that Moses and Aaron would consult with their sister for advice in certain situations.
Mm.
Whether or not it's because of them being irrational or not 100% sure. I like that drosh though, for me personally. Anyone else? All right. So let's see, here we go. So this is our, familiar verses. This is right after, again, Moses and Aaron fall on their faces and they're asking for advice from God. And in this moment, I talked about this, I think, last week, the idea of when Moses and Aaron, when they fall on their faces, it's a moment of mindfulness, it's a moment of reflection, it's a moment to try to gain some sort of revelation and answer from God. It's a chance for them to just collect their thoughts. Because if they had just been yelled at and they didn't consult with God in that moment, things could have been even worse, potentially. And here, so they fall on their faces, they're trying to slow their heart rate down, they're trying to breathe, they're trying to hear the voice of God. So here it says, God spoke to Moses, saying, you and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes, order the rock to yield its water. Speak to the rock is in the Hebrew. So thus you shall produce water for them from the rock and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts. Okay, seems pretty simple, right? Take the rod, get everyone together in front of the rock and tell the rock, hey rock, can we please get some water? We're thirsty here. Okay. Verse 9. Moses took the rod from before God as he had been commanded. So far, so good. Verse 9, he's doing it right. 10, Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock. All right, he's 2 for 2. He's doing well. And then he said to them, listen, you rebels, Hamorim, shall we get water for you out of this rock? Moses raised his hand and he struck the rock twice with his rod. Out came copious water. The community and their beasts drank. But God said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land that I have given them. Those are the waters of Meribah, meaning that the Israelites quarreled with God, whose sanctity was affirmed through them. So this is the famous moment where Moses strikes the rock, unable to go into the promised land. But I want to focus on something really that I noticed the other day. It's in verse 11. No, verse 12. Where God tells Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people. That's why you shall not lead the congregation into the land. Right? So striking the rock was wrong, but it wasn't the ultimate sin, at least for me. It was the fact that Moses was unable to be a proper leader in front of the community. Had this been done, not in front of the entire community, things may have been different. But Moses and Aaron, right, we have our legal expert in Moses and our spiritual leader in Aaron, who are supposed to be the ones that everyone looks up to. How do they act? How do they have a relationship with God? And a people that don't have a lot of faith to begin with, the Israelites. And
Well, it
here,
makes the people think that Moses and Aaron are, and they don't think about God doing this.
oh, Aaron and Moses?
Yeah, because Moses and Aaron struck the rock, and as God says, you didn't trust me enough.
Exactly. You know,
And it
because
makes God look weak in the sight of the Israelite people, whereas Moses and Aaron look, wow, they're pretty cool.
yeah, and what's going to happen? We already had an issue with the golden calf, with idol worship, and here I don't think I brought the commentary. It might have been a different sheet, but it talks about when Aaron and when Moses says, "Listen, you rebels, shall we get water?" In that moment, by using the word "we," Moses is kind of worshiping himself.
Well, he means himself and his brother.
Yeah, the two of them. But it is, as you said, Eileen, they are essentially telling the Israelites in that moment, we are the ones with all of the power. Worship us because we are the ones that cause the water to happen. We are the ones that cause all the food to come. It's not God.
Mm.
And then what's going to happen?
They get punished. They don't go into the land.
They get punished. But, God would probably choose another nation to try to lead. God's already not happy with the Israelites because of what they had done earlier. And here, this is an easy excuse for them to just worship man instead of God in this moment. And Moses and Aaron lost that ability. But again, we have to remember Miriam just died. They aren't thinking straight. They're a little angry, right? So they
No.
aren't, they're not thinking necessarily about the language that they're using. I'm sure we've all been angry in our lives, at least once, right? Even if we don't want to admit that we've been angry. And when we are upset at a friend, at a loved one, in a community, or even online, right? We will just spew whatever. And we are not being particular with our language. I think in this moment, Moses and Aaron are clearly not thinking straight. And they are just angry and they are saying, well, we're going to get water from this rock. We're the ones in charge. We have the power. Listen to us. Intense. And God said, you forgot what this is all about. This is not about Moses. Right? We learned earlier, Moses is the most humble person that ever existed. Does Moses seem very humble in this moment?
Well, no, he seems to think he's God.
Yeah, he seems to be like a big narcissist. He's got a huge ego in this moment. Right? Not very humble at all. But what's interesting, Aaron, who last week, there was a moment where Aaron doesn't say a word during the incident with Korah. Moses is silent. Not Moses, Aaron is silent. And our rabbis pick up on the idea that silence is ideal. When you have nothing to say, stay silent, because otherwise you're going to get in trouble. Aaron doesn't say anything. Moses is the one who does all the talking here.
I don't think that's why Aaron keeps quiet. I think Aaron basically didn't even care that God had killed his sons. He's just like a coward, or whatever you want to call it. He just follows along with his brother.
Perhaps, but the rabbis do pick up on the concept of shtika, of staying silent in certain moments. And Aaron, maybe not in the moment when he loses his sons, is it ideal?
He doesn't. He says nothing.
He says nothing, but there are other moments when he doesn't say anything, and had he opened his mouth, he probably would have gotten in trouble. Are there moments in our lives that had we stayed silent when we were in an argument, it would have been better for us? When the moment we open our mouths and we say something, it causes an issue.
Well, that might be true, but if you stand up for your ideals, or that somebody comes along and for no reason just whacks your kid, you don't just keep silent.
Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Steve?
I've long thought that God not allowing Moses to enter the promised land was a disproportionate punishment.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's how I have always thought of it and continue to think of it. It was disproportionate.
Yeah.
given his great leadership, and the term, is this a forgiving God or is this a vengeful God? And I think this leads one to think that this is a vengeful God who is wronged Moses.
True.
Yeah. Right.
And in Moses, in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses asks God quite politely, please just let me in the land, just 1 foot in the land, and then I can die and I'll be happy. And God says, no, and don't ever ask me that question again.
Yeah.
It's a little sad. George?
Yeah. Okay, this is not any political statement. I'm going to start with that. Okay. I did teach management theory. I have a doctorate in it at the university. And, some leaders are good in certain situations,
Yeah.
And maybe Moses, that period, he was the best person.
Mm.
And maybe Joshua was the best person for the next phase.
Yeah.
Just because you're good doing one thing, doesn't mean you're good at the next phase.
Yeah. And that's kind of how I tend to look at it as
Yeah.
well. I mean,
Yeah.
when they go into the land of Israel, immediately they have to go to battle.
Yeah.
Moses is an old man. Moses is not a general by any means. Joshua is the one who's going to actually be able to lead the people in battle
Yeah.
and to conquer the land. But it reminds me, there's in Hamilton, I don't know if anyone has seen Hamilton, but the song One Last Time, where George Washington says the people need to learn to move on and to accept that I'm not a king. I can't be a leader forever. And they need to learn that at a certain moment, a new, younger leader, perhaps, should step up who is good for that time period. Right?
Yeah.
Moses was great in the wilderness. Well, for the most part in the wilderness. But someone else, Joshua needed to then lead the people. But still, is it fair that Moses wasn't even allowed to go into the land? Moses could have said, I don't want to be leader. Joshua can be leader, but at least let me die happy.
Well, sometimes you don't know when to stop, You don't
Exactly.
know
And
when
I
to
saw
hang up your spikes, like
exactly.
baseball or any other, endeavor.
Yeah.
It's like a parent
Yeah.
who tells a kid he can't do something, and the kid says, well, just one more time, and the parent still says no.
No, yeah, exactly. And like I went last night, my wife and I saw the Rolling Stones, and they have the song "You Can't Always Get What You Want." That's exactly what's happening now, right? Moses wants to go into the land,
Yeah.
but he can't always get what he wants.
Yeah.
He gets what he needs. Ultimately, he still gets a relationship with God. He still dies peacefully. He gets buried by God, right? And there's even the tradition in mystic circles that Moses's body is constantly being moved mysteriously by God, so no one can actually find the location of Moses. So it's interesting. We're gonna pause there. An interesting Torah portion, a lot of